Hey, welcome back to Common Sense OT Security. Today we are looking at OT threat modeling. And let's just start with a brief definition of what that is. I've just pulled something up from a Google search. Threat modeling is a structured process of proactively analyzing potential threats and vulnerabilities within a system to identify and address them before they can be exploited. Oh, that's a mouthful. This is not what we're going to do today because let's be honest, this sounds like complex shit. And we're not doing complex shit today. We are doing OT threat modeling for dummies. So what I'm trying to do is to give you an understanding that you don't have to dive into all those intricacies of what could go wrong and the worst case, etc. But how you can use an OT threat modeling approach to actually get something done rather than getting lost in theoretical models and analytics, etc. So, but before we dive into it, we are going to set the stage a little bit. In a sense, threat modeling is about figuring out all the things that could go wrong in order to use that to furnish a protective strategy. And the problem in OT security is that any strategy that you might devise will take years to implement. That's the reality. That's what makes OT security difficult. It's not that it would be super complex. It is that any configuration change, any patching, etc., takes extremely long, and it's so much more expensive than anything that you can accomplish in IT security. So you start with considering all the things that could go wrong, and if you want to get an idea of what that could entail, I ask you to check out this old video from 8 years ago where I give a talk at S4, and the title of the talk is Cyber Physical Attack Engineering. You can easily find it on our YouTube channel, or so on the OT-based YouTube channel, or you go to the S4 YouTube channel where you will also be able to find this video, Cyber Physical Attack Engineering. And I pretty much stepped through all the various possibilities on how you could mess up an OT installation. And the reason I bring this up, this is just for those of you who want to get an idea of what could be involved. And it's a lot of what could go wrong, so what you in principle should consider. But again, this is the for dummies version, so you don't need to go through this whole exercise because it might take years to finish. Today, I'm going to give you some ideas on how you could dumb this down in order to achieve good results quickly. Okay, so when we discuss threat modeling, it's always a good idea to start with, well, which threats and risks are we presently seeing in the wild, in real life? And the answer is pretty simple. We are seeing ransomware attacks. And if you ask this man, I would say, well, that is something that you should absolutely prepare against. And let's just think about what that would mean. So when it comes to ransomware, are you concerned about your PLCs and RTUs and actuators and sensors? Why should you? So they will not be the target of a ransomware attack. The attacker, the ransomware operator, doesn't even know what a PLC is. They have no clue. And they don't need to know, because for them, it's all about exploiting or extorting the victim, collect the ransom by promising to release the password so that you can decrypt your encrypted files. Where do these encrypted files reside? Well, that's very simple, on your Windows PCs. So in a way, you could totally shrink that whole threat scenario down to Windows PCs. Now, the question is, in OT, do we have insecure Windows PCs? Damn, actually we do, and quite a lot, because OT Windows PCs are almost all the time, they're out of patch. They're stuffed with vulnerability laden software, such as outdated browser versions, such as Adobe Flash, etc. So that should be your primary concern. You have a ton of very vulnerable Windows PCs in your OT environment, and if a ransomware attack should actually propagate into your process networks where these vulnerable PCs reside, you will have a problem. So those PCs will be, the files will be encrypted, and that will result in downtime. Because once that your HMIs, your engineering stations are down, they are defunctional. You will no longer be able to maintain your production. So that means when you really want to prepare against the most commonplace threat these days, you would focus on your Windows boxes. You would not at all be concerned about your PLCs. Why is that? Because guess what? You cannot encrypt the ladder logic on a PLC. It doesn't work, because the PLC doesn't give you the capability to run random executables that would then somehow encrypt the ladder logic. So that is not a thing. And even if it would be, you would say, well, I just use the engineering station and just upload a new ladder logic version. So that is not a thing. When you are concerned about ransomware, you should focus on your Windows boxes. Now, let's take this a little bit further. Now let's forget about ransomware. We would say, well, we got that covered. Yes, everything is up to date, and we have everything up to patch. So what about those cyber physical attacks that everybody is so worried about when you think about the crown jewels and the critical cost of compromise, etc. So now we're talking the PLCs and the physical process behind that PLC. Just keep in mind, a cyber physical attack doesn't attack your PLC, it attacks the physical process. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a cyber physical attack. And if you want to accomplish that, how would you achieve that? Well, I mean, let's just look at the couple of attacks that we have on the record. At the end of the day, it's actually not that difficult to understand. If your PLC is exposed to the public internet, then it's pretty simple to do any process manipulations, because a PLC doesn't have any built-in security features. There is no antivirus, there is no patching, etc. It's just an open book, not only for the engineering station, but also for malware. And this basically, the technological foundation for this is that once that you can talk to the PLC on the network, you can really, in a sense, write to any memory location. Okay, and that's bad. So if you would be stupid enough to put your PLC on the public internet, then you should not be surprised if that PLC will no longer function after 24 hours or so. So that is certainly an issue. And that issue is, unfortunately, it's much more prevalent than it should be, because, well, there is no need to put that PLC on the public internet, at least not without any kind of additional security layer. But still, people do it. Now, certainly, this is something that you could figure out rather quickly. And if, let's just say, your control engineers, they're unable to tell you because they have totally forgotten about that internet connection. You could at the least just do a showdown search, and then if you see your very own PLCs pop up in that search, you know that you got a problem. However, if that's you, you should not be listening to this channel. No, I don't want to have you here. If you're so blatantly stupid that you expose your PLCs to the public internet, this is not for you. So we're just moving on here. So this is just about to give you an idea about those very, very silly configurations. And if you get hacked because you have your PLCs on the public internet with no additional protection, or you're not a case for OT security, you're a case for other institutions, I would say. So we also put that out of the way. And now let's focus on the more interesting cyber physical attacks, such as what we have seen with Stuxnet, such as what we have seen in Ukraine in 2015. And certainly those cyber physical attacks, they involve PLC manipulations. Or also if you think about the Triconix attack, okay? So they involve manipulations of ladder logic, or at least of process variables that are maintained on the PLC, in the PLC's memory. So how does that work? And that gets us to a very interesting observation. You will, for any cyber physical attack, you will always need a staging server in the form of a Windows PC. Otherwise, it's not going to happen, since you are not that stupid to put that PLC on the internet. We have discussed this just a second ago. So you will need that staging server. So, or I could also make my argument like this. When you think about threat modeling and when you think about your risk, etc., an important piece of the puzzle is the intrusion. How could the intrusion be accomplished? That is the big question, and that is what usually makes a cyber physical attack difficult. Because when you think about all the vulnerabilities that you learn from CISA or from the research teams, etc., they just focus on one piece of automation gear in isolation. But that doesn't occur in real life. So in real life, the attacker needs to intrude, and that's the difficult part, because they, in most cases, don't know the victim's environment, so that they can certainly launch a big operation. They can try to sneak in and then propagate from here to there and do some east-west and north-south movement, but that is going to take time. That's going to take effort, and we would not necessarily expect such effort when it comes to more mundane targets such as manufacturing facilities. But anyhow, so even in those more sophisticated cases, you will need a staging server, and you will need the opportunity to traverse network boundaries. Okay? Once that you have accomplished to get to the PLC, it's pretty much game over. Pretty much, right? So that is what makes the attack difficult, because you have to understand, you have to figure out that environment, and you will have to circumvent any protective barriers in that environment, mostly in the form of network security barriers. So let's just sum this up. I would say it's rather surprising if you compare this to the ransomware scenario, where we also are talking about unprotected or not sufficiently protected Windows boxes. Same thing with any cyber physical attack. You need a Windows box that you can use as a staging server. Okay? And that also means if your Windows box is protected very well, then most likely the attack, because the attacker will be unable to propagate into the process network where all the juicy stuff is, your crown jewels, okay? And that brings me to the other point. You have heard that a couple of times. You just figure out what your crown jewels are, and that could be like the safety PLCs, etc. Yeah, well, if you ask me, that might just turn into a more academic exercise, because that's not the really interesting question when it comes to protection. The interesting question is, how would the attacker get there? And this is where you actually have a chance to give the attacker a bad day, because you can just introduce your security layers, your network security, so that the attack has no chance of succeeding. And that becomes pretty clear when you think about attacks on the record. For example, the Triconex attack. In that example, the big security flaw, if you will, was in the Triconex attack. They thought they had a DMZ when in fact they did not, which would have been easily surfaced if somebody had done a serious security risk analysis, especially focusing on the network architecture. Apparently that didn't happen. That only happened after the fact. And we know about this also from a talk at S4, and so usually it's a good source of informational content. So in general, I urge you to study those few actual cyber-physical attacks that we have on the record, because you can learn a lot. You will see samples of such work on our channel, the OT-based YouTube channel. So for example, you will see my breakdown of the 2015 cyber attack against Ukraine. And you will also see in that very same playlist, let's just say where have it, where do we have it? Stuxnet, no, background knowledge, or the Red Pill series. Okay, so a couple of things. Just analyzing those attacks on the record will give you a lot of insight. And the lens that you should use is only one question. And the question is, how would this attack have been prevented? This is what I want you to focus on. So, just to sum it up in rather simple terms, the attacker always needs a Windows box as a staging server. And they will need some loopholes in the network architecture. Okay, so that means for your protective strategy, I advise you to put a priority on these two things. First, check out your Windows vulnerabilities, and I promise you will find thousands of them, and devise a strategy on how to mitigate those, especially for those Windows boxes which are more exposed. So in other words, if you have a Windows box deep down in the process networks, and you think, well, everything is already protected by network security, well, you probably don't need to worry that much about that particular box. But if it's some Windows box, let's just say in the DMZ or very close, right, that would be a different story. And then the second priority that I suggest you to consider is network security. So at the end of the day, everything in those lower levels, the automation gear, the PLCs, the RTUs, the actuators and the sensors, they're pretty much insecure by design. There is nothing you can do about it. And any suggestion or any strategies for secure PLC coding, I mean, it's a nice try, but you wouldn't really prevent an attacker from just messing up the PLC anyway, and thereby the process. So you have little opportunity to arrive at any hardening, etc., in the process networks on the PLC level or below, but you have every opportunity in the higher levels, especially when you consider network security and Windows boxes. In order to make that happen, you have to know what you have. Otherwise, you will not see all those vulnerabilities. And this is where certainly a good OT asset management system will help you, because just as an example, it will expose all your networks, just like that. So in OT base, you have a network inventory, and it will show you all the individual networks with what's on there, etc. And from there, you will identify a ton of security issues. And only after you have accomplished that, I suggest to focus more on the process-related stuff, like well, what about those safety PLCs, etc. You will be able to see that rather quickly. So if you're, just as an example, if your safety PLC is in a regular production network, well, you already know we have a problem. So that is not best practice what we're doing here. Even though a safety PLC is much more difficult to compromise than a basic production controller, and you have seen that in the Triconex attack. They certainly attempted the compromise, but they were not smart enough. So the safety PLC simply tripped, thereby having everybody focus on that particular PLC and thereby spotting the attack. So that is what I wanted to share today. Bottom line is, when you think about threat modeling, as with so many other topics, don't let anybody tell you, oh, it's a challenge, it's so complex, etc. I mean, it's only a challenge if you drink the Kool-Aid of those people who want to sell you services, etc., because they want you to assume, oh, this is so complex. You really need an expert like myself. So therefore, just give me that PO, and then we will get to work. And that is that is not the case in most scenarios. What I would like you to do is to use a more pragmatic approach to OT security, where you take the most important and practically relevant bits of concepts such as threat modeling and boil them down rather quickly to identify those parts that you can use to actually make a difference. And that actually making a difference in real life always involves how complex would it be in implementation. So let's get back to the beginning. If your idea of threat modeling is that super complex stuff, a structured process, and no, you don't have to do that to yourself and to others, right? So you just boil it down and take away what you see. Oh, this actually this works for us. I can see how we can leverage this to make a difference. So that's my advice for today. Just use your common sense. See you next week, same place, same time.